Okay, so where can I install WordPress? It either can be on a local host environment, so like i.e. your computer that has a web host on it, and a web hosting solution like Apache or something, and MySQL, or a cloud web hosting server. So I want to make a note that some of the next slides about the installation process are going to be true for localhost and for cloud hosting. So let's talk about the complete process so that you can see how to get WordPress set up on a server. It's going to talk about transferring the base WordPress files to a web serving folder in the file system, about MySQL, so creating database user and database, and then lastly installing the MySQL tables and the data into those, or into that empty database. Okay, so first let's talk about the file transfer. All right, so let's just look at these two components. Forget about the MySQL right now. What we've got here in this diagram is a little person with his little computer, and it says end users client. Not about a browser necessarily, but you could be using FileZilla, or if you're on localhost and this isn't really in the cloud, this installation of WordPress is going to be on your local computer environment, then really you're you're going to have your end user client no matter what. And what you're going to be doing is moving those WordPress files that you downloaded from wordpress.org into the web serving directory. All right, and so that's what this step is doing. So you're either going to be using something like FTP protocol, or you're going to just, if it's on your local file system, you're just going to be moving the files over. But this is going to access the portion of the file system that Apache's web service makes visible to the world on port 80 or 443 of the server. Okay, so the second thing is going to be dealing with MySQL. So creating a database and the database user account. So here what we've got is we have the end user's browser down in the lower left corner, because you're going to do this through a browser almost always. Okay, so unless you are really into using the command line, which I'm not going to assume. So what you're going to do is your end user is going to connect to the host provider site, like if you have a cPanel or something. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then it's probably because you haven't ever gotten your own hosting, and that's fine. But sometimes the host provider site will have like a cPanel or control panel that you can connect to and do some of these things with. I'm not going to cover that. I'm going to talk about how you can use phpMyAdmin. Okay, so first you connect that way, and then the end user uses web tools to create the database user and database, either something in the cPanel or phpMyAdmin. Then MySQL is going to update its master tables and to reflect the changes that you just made with the new database and the new user. And then the web host is going to, the site, either it's a cPanel or a phpMyAdmin, is going to return the confirmation of those changes. Okay, now let's talk about the tables. The next step is going to be populating the database tables with data. So, okay, and the reason I'm showing you in all of these separate diagrams is because I really do think of these as separate steps. So first uploading, then creating the user and its database, and then now we need to actually basically install the data inside the data tables, well, the tables, and then put the data inside those tables. So again, here we have the end user's browser, and at this time we have WP files or WordPress files in the web serving folder, and we have an empty database, but they aren't linked. So now we need to use the browser to connect the web files to the database and create the data tables. So the end user is going to type the URL of the WordPress web folder in the browser address. So it would be like HTTP. If it was localhost, it might be, localhost/WordPress or whatever you name that folder. And by the way, you can name the WordPress folder something different. If it's on the web, host in the cloud, then it's the same thing. You're going to type HTTP, // domain name / whatever the WordPress installation is, or in the case that you just want it to actually be the domain name, then what you would have to do is, instead of having the WordPress files inside of the WordPress folder. You would just have to have all of those WordPress files in the root level of your domain name directory. Okay. So anyway, the end user is going to type the URL of that web folder. Okay, in the browser. And then WordPress, the index page, is going to see that there's no database connection. So it's going to load the configuration page. And the user, the end user on your browser, you're going to input the database connection information and you're going to submit it. The next step is that MySQL is going to return results. It's going to populate, well, first of all, it's going to create the tables inside the database, and then it's going to populate those tables with the data. Then it's going to all be default WordPress installation data. And then lastly, Apache is going to deliver success, and it's going to prompt the user to continue to log in so that you can actually start doing stuff with your WordPress installation. Okay, so which one should you use, the cloud or the local installation? So there are advantages and disadvantages to both, depending on what your goals are with the site, so whether or not you're using it for testing, development, production, so forth, right? Let's look at some of the benefits and drawbacks. So for local host installations, some advantages be convenience of the local environment, right? It's just handy, it's in your own computer. There's a quick setup usually, and it's more secure. And then also you don't have to worry about duplicate world visible content. And you might wonder, why does that matter? Well, if you're really concerned about search engine optimization, Google will actually penalize you if it discovers that there is identical web content on multiple domains. It sees that as a sort of a blacklisted nefarious activity for search engine optimization, so it'll actually lower you in your ranking results. So you got to be careful about that if you have duplicate sites and you're just trying to restyle something. Another advantage, and of course if you're on localhost, then Google can't see your stuff. So anyway, the other advantage of a localhost environment is that you don't have to worry about live domain interference. So you know, if you already have a current domain and you're trying to redesign it, you don't have to worry that it's going to interfere with the existing domain. So disadvantages, you have potential FTP failures. So because, you know, your computer might have firewalls that are going to block FTP services in and out of your, especially automated ones that are in and out of your computer. So also setting folder permissions, a lot of times servers, they're automatically going to have all the correct, it's referred to as UMasks. It's basically, I'm not going to get into what a UMask is, but servers are going to essentially have sort of parent level permissions, and when you install something it starts to inherit permissions. And on your personal computer you're going to have a different kind of UMask most likely than say you will on your domain server. And sometimes like you're going to get permissions issues where you're going to have to go and fix permissions on your local computer, where you're going to have to give, you know, everybody read and write privileges, say to an uploads folder, for instance. So sometimes you can have those issues on a local computer where you probably wouldn't on a live server. And also you later are going to have the pain of transferring your local developed, you know, locally developed website up to an actual domain later. And believe it or not, that can actually be a lot more tedious than you might think. It's not like just moving some files over the way you would have done with static pages or even with dynamic PHP pages that didn't tap into a database. You have to start dealing with a whole different set of criteria, like you know, the data that's in the database about absolute pathways and about you know, relative pathways and web host names and things like that. It's all going to be different whenever you change it. It's no longer going to be localhost. It's going to be something.com probably. How many path directories you have to where it's located. A lot of those things get a little bit tricky. So cloud hosting installations. Advantages would be ease of FTP updates, plugins, backups. So anytime you're doing updating of the WordPress, you know, core or plugins, or if you're doing automated FTP backups, all that stuff is typically done through FTP or SFTP, whichever. No server differences or surprises. So if you're actually developing on the server where you are going to be installing this, you know, ultimately you're going to be installing the website, you're not going to have surprises, you know, like it's not going to have a different version of MySQL or a different version of PHP, where maybe some of your scripts worked and now they don't, you know, whenever you move it. Because if you just do it all on the same server, then you know that the environment's going to be the same. Another advantage is development access from anywhere. That means if you have computer access, you know, when you're on vacation or, you know, something like that, even sometimes from your phone. If the stuff is already up on the server, live, world visible, that means that you can typically access it from anywhere. You don't have to just have your computer with you all the time. Excuse me, so disadvantages. For cloud hosting installations, you're going to be subject to potential network problems while you're working. This is actually, you know, this is actually not that unrealistic, especially if you have a shared hosting plan. I don't want to go crazy in talking about the different hosting plans, but the basic level, or even sometimes I shouldn't say basic, because you can usually get like a basic, a middle, sort of middle ground, and then like a deluxe kind of hosting plan on a lot of different web hosts. But those are the ones that they're going to natively advertise right off the bat are going to be on shared hosting plans, meaning that your website is going to live basically on a slice of a larger server where other people's stuff lives. Even if you have unlimited bandwidth, etc., you literally are sharing server space and processing and memory consumption with a whole bunch of other websites. And if other websites, let's say, have something that goes into an endless loop or something gets out of control and it starts to bring the server down, you're subject to that. Your website is going to be subject to that problem. And most people do shared hosting because it's affordable. So that's something to consider. And it's not totally unrealistic. It does happen. So another disadvantage would be working on live searchable site that's world visible. It means that somebody might accidentally find some of the stuff that you're doing. So there's some things that you can do to prevent that, but it actually makes your development process a lot sort of more laborious. Another thing is that you have the potential need to create workarounds for an existing live domain. So if you're trying to develop for, you know, mydomain.com, and there already is an existing website called mydomain.com that you have in place, and you don't really want to jeopardize what's currently up, then you have to usually create a subdomain, or you have to do some, you know, separate site somewhere else that you're going to have to transfer, and you're going to have to change it once it's developed. Potential for SEO penalty for duplicate content. This is what I was referring to earlier. So if you already have a website, let's say it's already in WordPress and it's up and running on your server, and you want all of the same exact content and the same, you know, navigational choices and posts and pages and stuff. So you basically duplicate the database and you start with a new theme. And if you don't know what I'm talking about yet, that's okay. If you have an inkling, then fine. Then technically your information is going to be duplicated, and if Google finds that you've got identical content in two separate domains, it could actually penalize you. Anyway, these are some of the issues that we're going to be dealing with as we move forward, and hopefully this is a helpful introduction so that you can get a better sense of how WordPress works and kind of where we're going to go from here.